Let us begin by understanding something that most people never question: the nature of doubt itself. You have been taught, perhaps without even realizing it, to treat doubt as something real, as something meaningful, even protective. But what if I told you that doubt is not a signal of truth? It is not a warning. It is not a reliable guide. It is simply a pattern, nothing more than a repeated way of thinking that has been practiced so often it now feels automatic. Think about it carefully. There was a time when you did not doubt this particular desire of yours. There was a moment when the idea first came to you, and it felt possible, perhaps even exciting. But then gradually thoughts began to appear. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? And because these thoughts were entertained, repeated, and emotionally accepted, they began to take root. Over time, repetition gave them authority, and what was once just a passing thought became what you now call doubt. But here is the truth you must grasp. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates the illusion of truth. The mind does not distinguish between what is real and what is repeated. It simply accepts what it hears most often. So if you have been repeating thoughts of limitation, fear, or uncertainty, then of course doubt feels natural to you. It feels justified. It feels real. But it is only real in the sense that a habit is real, formed through repetition, sustained through attention. Now, if doubt is nothing more than a habit of thought, then it is not something you must fight. It is something you must outgrow. You do not eliminate doubt by arguing with it, analyzing it, or resisting it. In fact, every time you wrestle with doubt, you give it attention, and attention is the very thing that keeps it alive. Instead, you begin to see it for what it truly is, a shadow created by repeated thinking, and you withdraw your belief from it. Consider this. If a thought has been repeated enough times to become doubt, then it can be replaced by another thought repeated just as consistently. The mind is impressionable. It is moldable. It is always responding to what you dwell upon. So the question is not, how do I stop doubting? The real question is, what am I choosing to repeat instead? You must become aware of the inner conversations you are constantly having. For it is in these quiet, unnoticed moments that doubt is either strengthened or dissolved. When you catch yourself entertaining a thought of uncertainty, do not panic. Do not condemn yourself. Simply recognize that this is an old pattern playing itself out, and then gently but deliberately redirect your attention to what you choose to believe instead. This is the beginning of mastery, not the absence of doubtful thoughts, but the refusal to give them authority. You are not at the mercy of your mind. You are the one who gives it direction. And when you understand that doubt is not a fixed reality but a repeated assumption, you begin to reclaim your power. For what has been learned can be unlearned, and what has been repeated can be replaced. And in that realization, doubt loses its foundation. Now that you begin to see doubt for what it truly is, a pattern sustained by repetition, you are ready to understand the principle that dissolves it at its root. For there is a law at work within you, whether you are aware of it or not. It is the law that governs what you experience, what you become, and what you believe is possible. And this law does not respond to your wishes, nor to your hopes. It responds only to what you assume to be true. You have been conditioned to believe that life happens from the outside in, that you must first see evidence before you can believe, that you must first receive before you can feel fulfilled. But this is the reversal of truth. The world you experience is not the cause, it is the effect. It is the reflection of what you have already accepted within yourself. And so, if you wait for external proof before you allow yourself to believe, you remain trapped in a cycle where nothing truly changes. The law of assumption asks something entirely different of you. It asks that you become in consciousness the person you desire to be before any physical evidence appears. Not later, not when circumstances improve, but now. It asks you to step into the identity of the one who already has, already is, already lives the reality you seek. And this is where most falter, because it feels unnatural at first. The senses protest, the mind argues. It says, how can I believe this when I cannot see it? But you are not asked to ignore reality, you are asked to redefine it. For reality is not confined to what the eyes perceive. Reality begins within, in the unseen realm of thought and feeling. And what you consistently accept there must, in time, take form in the world around you. This is not speculation. It is law. To assume something is not merely to think it once or to say it occasionally. It is to occupy a state of being. It is to feel the naturalness of it, to carry it as a quiet knowing within you. When you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, you are not pretending. You are selecting a version of reality and aligning yourself with it. And as you remain faithful to that inner state, the outer world begins to rearrange itself to mirror what you have accepted as true. You must understand that the moment you assume something fully, it begins to take root. It may not appear instantly, but the process has already begun. Just as a seed planted in the soil does not emerge overnight, your assumption requires time to express itself. Yet once planted, its growth is inevitable if you do not dig it up with doubt. This is why becoming precedes having. You do not become confident because success arrives. Success arrives because you have assumed confidence. You do not feel worthy because something validates you. Validation comes because you have accepted your worth. Everything flows from the identity you claim within yourself. So ask yourself, not what do I want, but who would I be if it were already true? How would you think? How would you feel? How would you move through your world? And then begin to embody that, not perfectly, not forcefully, but consistently. Return to it as often as you can, until it begins to feel familiar, until it begins to feel natural. For the law does not question your assumption. It does not judge it. It simply reflects it. And when you understand this, you no longer chase outcomes, you step into them. And in that moment, you cease waiting for life to change, because you have already changed within. And once you begin to understand that your assumptions shape your reality, the question naturally arises, how do you sustain this inner shift when the outer world appears unchanged? For it is one thing to assume a new identity in a moment of inspiration, and quite another to remain faithful to it when confronted with opposing evidence. This is where the hidden technique reveals itself, not in force, not in struggle, but in persistence. You see, it is not the intensity of a single moment that transforms your life. It is the consistency of returning to the same inner state again and again until it becomes your dwelling place. Many will assume for a day, perhaps even for an hour, and then abandon it the moment doubt reappears or circumstances contradict their desire. But the one who understands this law does not waver so easily. They know that the outer world is always reflecting past assumptions, not present ones. And so they do not judge their progress by appearances. To persist in the end state means that you remain inwardly loyal to the version of yourself who already has what you seek. You do not visit this state occasionally, you live there as often as you can. When your mind wanders back to old fears or familiar doubts, you do not condemn yourself. You simply return. Quietly, gently, repeatedly, you bring yourself back to the feeling of fulfillment as though it were already done. This return is the technique. Not once, not twice, but as many times as necessary. Each time you return, you are strengthening a new pattern. You are reminding the mind of what you have chosen to accept as true. And over time, this repeated returning begins to feel less like effort and more like habit. The state you once had to consciously enter begins to feel natural, almost automatic. But understand this clearly. Persistence is not force. It is not straining to believe something you internally reject. It is not repeating empty words while feeling the opposite. True persistence is a quiet conviction. It is the willingness to remain with the feeling of the wish fulfilled, even when the senses suggest otherwise. It is a calm refusal to abandon your assumption simply because it has not yet appeared. There will be moments when the outer world seems to challenge you. Situations may arise that appear to contradict everything you have assumed. In those moments, you are given a choice. You may return to the old state of doubt, reacting as you once did, or you may remain faithful to your new assumption. And each time you choose the latter, you deepen your alignment with the reality you desire. Do not underestimate the power of this. For every time you persist, you are impressing the subconscious mind more deeply. You are stabilizing the identity you have chosen. And as this identity becomes fixed within you, the outer world has no choice but to conform. Think of it as holding a vision steady, regardless of passing shadows. The shadows may come and go, but the vision remains unchanged. And eventually the shadows dissolve, not because you fought them, but because you refuse to give them permanence. So do not be discouraged by delay, nor distracted by appearances. Your work is not to manipulate the outer world, but to remain faithful to the inner one. For it is in that unseen persistence that transformation is taking place. And the one who persists in the end inevitably lives in the end. And as you persist in this inner state, you will come face to face with what appears to be the greatest obstacle of all, the evidence of your senses. For the world around you will continue for a time to reflect old assumptions. It will show you conditions, results, and circumstances that seem to deny what you have chosen to believe. And if you are not watchful, you will be tempted to accept these appearances as final, as fixed, as truth. But you must understand something with absolute clarity. What you are seeing is not a contradiction of your new assumption. It is the outpicturing of your former one. It is the echo of what you once accepted as true, still playing itself out in visible form. And just as an echo lingers even after the sound has ceased, so too do old assumptions linger in your world after you have begun to change within. If you react to these appearances, if you allow them to disturb you, to convince you that nothing is changing, you unknowingly give life back to the very state you are trying to leave behind. For reaction is agreement. To emotionally respond to what you see as though it were final is to reaffirm it. And in doing so, you continue the cycle. This is why you are called to a higher discipline, not of action but of perception. You are asked to see without being moved, to observe without accepting, to witness without reacting, not because you are denying reality, but because you are choosing which reality to give your allegiance to. The outer world may present one story, but you are no longer bound to accept it. This does not mean you close your eyes or pretend that nothing exists. It means you no longer grant authority to appearances. You understand that what is before you is temporary, fluid, and subject to change. And instead of reacting to it, you return inwardly to what you have already assumed to be true. When something arises that contradicts your desire, do not fight it. Do not analyze it. Do not attempt to fix it in that moment. Simply recognize it as an old pattern completing itself. And then gently shift your attention back to your chosen state. Remind yourself, not with strain but with calm certainty, of what you have accepted within. This is where true inner stability is formed. Not in the absence of contradiction, but in your ability to remain unchanged in the presence of it. The world may fluctuate, conditions may shift, but you remain anchored in your assumption. And in that anchoring, you begin to experience a quiet confidence, a knowing that is not dependent on what you see. Understand that the senses are not your enemy, but they are not your master. They report what has been, not what is becoming. And if you allow them to dictate your state, you will always be reacting to the past, never creating the future. So you learn to look at your world differently. Where once you saw obstacles, you now see remnants. Where once you saw proof of limitation, you now see the fading expression of old beliefs. And because you no longer give them your energy, they begin to lose their hold. For what is not sustained must eventually dissolve. And when you cease to react, you cease to reinforce. When you cease to reinforce, you begin to release. And what you release no longer has the power to remain. And in that quiet detachment from appearances, your new reality begins to take form. Now, as you begin to withdraw your attention from doubt and refuse to be governed by appearances, another truth must be firmly established within you, for it is often misunderstood. Many believe that confidence must come before they can persist, that certainty must be present before they can assume. They wait to feel ready, to feel convinced, to feel free of doubt before they commit to a new state. But this is not the way transformation occurs. Confidence is not the cause, it is the result. It is not the beginning of the process, but the outcome of it. What truly creates certainty is repetition. What you return to again and again begins to impress itself upon the mind, and what is impressed upon the mind begins to feel natural. And what feels natural is no longer questioned. Consider how any belief in your life was formed. It did not arrive fully developed in a single moment. It was built over time through repeated exposure, repeated thought, repeated acceptance. Whether it serves you or limits you, it was cultivated in the same way. And so if doubt has been created through repetition, it must be replaced through repetition. You are not asked to feel unwavering belief from the very beginning. You are asked only to return to the idea, to the feeling, to the assumption that what you desire is already yours. Each time you do this, even if it feels faint, even if it feels unfamiliar, you are planting a seed. And with each return, you water that seed. At first, it may feel mechanical. You may notice the mind resisting, questioning, drifting back to old patterns. This is natural, for the mind moves along familiar paths, and anything new will seem uncertain. But if you persist, not with force, but with quiet consistency, you begin to carve a new path. And as that path becomes more defined, the resistance begins to fade. Repetition does not merely remind the mind, it reconditions it. It replaces the old narrative with a new one. And over time, what once felt like an effort begins to feel like truth. You no longer have to convince yourself because the idea has already taken root within you. This is why your inner conversations matter so deeply. What you say to yourself in idle moments, what you imagine in quiet spaces, what you return to when your mind is unoccupied, these are the repetitions that shape your belief. Not what you declare once with intensity, but what you consistently dwell upon with familiarity. So you begin to choose your repetitions deliberately. You return to the feeling of fulfillment, even if only for a moment. You entertain thoughts that align with your desired reality, even if they feel new. And each time you do, you are strengthening a new assumption. Gradually, something shifts. The idea that once felt distant begins to feel possible. What felt possible begins to feel likely. And what feels likely begins to feel certain. Not because you forced it, not because you argued your way into belief, but because you repeated it enough times that it became familiar. And when something becomes familiar, the mind accepts it without resistance. It no longer questions, it no longer doubts, it simply agrees. So do not wait for confidence to begin. Begin and confidence will follow. Do not wait for certainty to act. Persist and certainty will emerge. For repetition, when sustained, transforms assumption into knowing. And what is repeated with conviction must in time become your reality. And as you begin to see how repetition reshapes belief, and how belief influences what you experience, you arrive at the most profound realization of all, that everything you seek is ultimately rooted in who you believe yourself to be. Not what you occasionally think, not what you momentarily feel, but the identity you consistently occupy within yourself. For it is this identity that determines what feels natural to you, what you accept, what you expect, and therefore what you receive. You may attempt to change circumstances, to adjust behaviors, to force outcomes, but if your sense of self remains unchanged, you will find yourself returning to the same patterns again and again. For the outer world does not respond to effort, it responds to identity. It mirrors back to you the version of yourself that you have accepted as true. So if doubt persists, it is not because you are failing, it is because at a deeper level you are still identifying with the one who doubts. You may speak words of confidence, you may attempt to feel differently, but if you still see yourself as uncertain, unworthy, or incapable, that identity will continue to express itself. And no amount of surface effort can override a deeply held self-concept. This is why the true work is not in controlling thoughts one by one, but in shifting the foundation from which those thoughts arise. When you change your identity, your thoughts begin to change naturally. Your reactions begin to change. Your expectations begin to change. And with them, your reality begins to change. To assume a new identity is not to pretend to be something you are not. It is to recognize that identity itself is fluid, that it is shaped by what you consistently accept about yourself. You have already done this countless times in your life, often without awareness. You have accepted labels, roles, and limitations, and over time they have become part of how you see yourself. But what has been accepted can be redefined. So you begin to ask yourself a different question. Not how do I get what I want, but who am I if I already have it? And as you contemplate this, you start to notice the shift. The version of you who has already realized this desire does not move through the world with doubt. That version does not question, does not hesitate, does not seek validation. It simply knows. And this knowing is not loud or forceful. It is quiet, steady, and natural. It does not need to prove itself, because it does not feel separate from what it desires. It has already accepted it as part of its identity. So you begin to embody this version of yourself, not perfectly, not all at once, but consistently. You think from this identity, you feel from it, you respond from it, and each time you do, you are reinforcing a new sense of self. At first it may feel unfamiliar, as all new identities do, but with repetition it begins to settle within you. It begins to feel like you. And as it does, something remarkable happens. The doubts that once seemed so persistent begin to fade, not because you fought them, but because they no longer belong to who you are. For doubt cannot exist in a mind that has already decided. It cannot take root in an identity that has already accepted its truth. It has no foundation, no place to stand. And so without effort, without struggle, it disappears. For when you become the one who knows, there is nothing left to doubt.